My name's Frank Foti of the Telos Alliance, and this is, believe me, a pleasure to do what we're going to do today. We've got something called the Legends of Audio, and seated to my right, for a left-handed guy, I've got an esteemed panel of individuals who I'm going to introduce here in a moment that we're going to tie together and talk about audio. We'll talk a little bit about broadcasting. We'll talk about some new technology. But most importantly, you're going to hear some stories about some of the greatest records ever made, musicians and experiences in the studio that are going to just, I've had a chance to hear some of these, and I tell you, you're in for a treat. Seated to my right is a young man by the name of Frank Filippetti. He's a Grammy award-winning engineer, mixer, producer, some of the bar bands he's been involved with: Kiss, Frank Zappa, Foreigner, Carly Simon, and James Taylor, and that's just to name a few. Next to him, and this guy, I gotta tell you, he's a wallflower. Trying to get him to talk is really, really difficult. This is our challenge, okay? His name's Ed Cherney. He's another Grammy award-winning engineer, mixer, and producer. Let's see, some of the groups he's been involved with, I don't know, maybe you haven't heard of these guys. The Rolling Stones, Eric Clapton, Sting, Bonnie Raitt, just to name a few. Sitting to his right is another wonderful individual, Al Schmidt, Grammy award-winning engineer and producer. And let's see, some of these people I have no idea. Who's Steely Dan? George Benson? Michael Jackson? Where's my glove? Diana Krall. Again, and by the way, if I understand correctly, Mr. Sinatra, yes. Count Basie, and the list goes on and on. Oh yeah, there's a guy who's also a fellow lefty, and I think he has a book coming out at some point, and this guy wrote the foreword to it, a guy by the name of, well, I should call him Sir Paul McCartney. Right. So, and then down at the end is a dear friend of mine, record producer, legendary producer of Steely Dan, Laura Nyro, Joe Cocker, Root Boy Slim, the Sex Change Band. Gary, was I in that group?
You, the Rudettes.
And the Rudettes. And this gentleman and I have an ongoing debate about, let's see, it's baseball season. So Gary, hopefully we'll see each other in Game 7, your Mets and my Cleveland Indians.
Wait, the Yankees.
Mets are starting off strong,
yeah.
8-1, right?
8-1.
Yeah, 8-1, thanks to Mickey Callaway, the pitching coach from the Cleveland Indians. And this is Gary Katz, who are here. We're gonna kick things off, and some of you may say, well, Telos Alliance, you guys are involved in radio, television. Why would you be having these legends of audio here today? Well, one of the things that we've always done, myself, my late partner Steve Church, and our host of talented people, is our goal is always to try to make broadcasting sound better. And by broadcasting, that could be radio, conventional, AM and FM, streaming, or chairs that don't stand upright, television, streaming, or what have you. And one of our goals is always what can we do to find those algorithms, processes, or functions to make audio sound better. And not too long ago, a colleague of mine in the Telos Alliance, Jason Tomlin, through whom I had the chance to meet Gary and the rest of our esteemed panel, we started working on a technology that does truly make things sound better, for lack of a better term, and it's referred to as Phi Def. So in our continued conquest of how to try to make broadcasting sound better, we've assembled this Legends of Audio panel today. So we may have some dialogue about Phi Def, and one of the things we'd like to see happen is we'll have some stories, and if there's two things. If we have questions from the audience, we will take them. And if you've clicked in and you're watching our live feed, I understand if you want to send us questions by way of YouTube Live, or Facebook Live, if you get your question to us, we'll find a way to get it to the panel and get it answered to you. So you guys haven't clicked in or come to see me, you've come to see our esteemed group. So gentlemen, I think maybe best thing to do is I'll throw it to you, Gary, and I'll let you take it from there.
before, Frank,
Wait a
that
minute,
was
he's
so
gonna talk. He's
beautiful.
older than I am.
Well, you're welcome. I would say also, since now this is preaching to the choir, right? We're in this loud environment, guys. We're probably, mic proximity is probably going to be a challenge for us. But Gary, it's all yours.
Get on the mic, Gary.
I'm on the mic, Al.
Okay, closer.
So, I met Jason about a year and a half ago.
Damn it.
I got
Hold on a
what's the
second.
matter?
Come on, get on the damn mic.
Take two of Ricky. Don't lose that number.
Boom, boom, boom. I got a call from a friend who said, I'd like you to come to Minneapolis and listen to this new algorithm just to get an opinion. And I met Jason, who, when I walked in, they played me a bunch of Steely Dan and some other stuff. And the first thing I said to him was, and I still say, it just sounds better. I can't possibly tell you why. These geniuses can. I can just tell you it sounded better. And from there, we've developed it and gotten it to a stage now where we feel that anything that we play just sounds better when it's been processed with Phi Def. These are old friends of mine. They're the go-to team for audio in my world. I went and I met
What's with
Al
the
and I
old-
saw Frank. You're a go-to. You're still here. I went to Al, saw Frank and Ed, and everybody who heard what we were doing said, yes, we love it. So we sat around and just started talking about stories. We played some of his records, played some of my records, and we're here now because it's at a point where we think it's universally better on any audio signal you'll hear. And I'm here with Al and Ed and Frank to tell you more about it and why. They can tell you better why.
Well, the first time I heard it, I was with Tommy LaPuma, legendary producer, and Tommy and I both had worked on the Breezin' album with George Benson, and they brought this in and they played us the record we did, and it sounded amazing. And then they played us the same album with the Phi Def hooked into it. And Tommy and I looked at one another. We couldn't believe it. We were hearing things we had never heard before on the record. So we both were, wow, this is amazing. We want to try this out and use it. And so we haven't had the opportunity to really get into putting it into much of our product yet. But I'm starting with something coming up on a new project I'm going to use it on. And I don't know how it works, but it works, and it just makes things sound so much better.
That's right.
I'm really happy with it. I mean, it's cool. Somebody told me it makes your brain listen differently or something.
Actually, there's a lot of truth in that, Al. There's a way that what's referred to, and even though I know we have a lot of our engineers here in the audience, the emotional experience is to how you listen to something. It plays on that. And one of the things that I've always done as an algorithm developer is, there's techno, it's what we still always refer to as the black magic of signal processing. And if it just sounds better and you want to listen longer, you've won.
Well, we certainly have done it with this.
Thank you.
It really is amazing. Eddie?
Here's the wallflower, folks.
Is this working? So, my name's Ed Cherney. I work as a music producer, recording engineer, and I've been doing it my entire adult life. The quest in the studio is always to bring as much emotion, to serve the music, to serve the people that make it in the studio. And I've always hoped that, man, if you could come into my studio and hear it like we hear it and hear what our intention is, I'm going to knock your socks off, and you've never heard anything like it before. Unfortunately, so when I was in college, the guy with the best stereo was the place that everybody gathered.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the fidelity and the emotion of music is the thing that drew us together. So now we live in an age where most people consume their music through one of these, through $8 transducers, and they don't they don't get a clue of what it is we're trying to do, what the intention of the artist is, and miss out on a lot of the emotion and fidelity, and how compelling the music we make can be. So any tool that I can put in my palette to get people closer to my studio where we're at and hear it like what our intention is, I support that 100%. Phi Def is something that I rely on. The thing that we fight for the most a lot of times, not always, because some records, some music should sound soupy, but is clarity. And you fight really hard to get clarity and to get that clarity to transfer. So if you're driving in a car, at 200 miles an hour driving down the road, you want to be able to hear it and hear some fidelity in it. So that's the thing we fight for, and this is something that I can put on my music, and it makes it clearer, it makes it more compelling, and it gets people closer to what we're hearing in the studio, and I can't ask for more than that.
I have a question. Can you all hear out there? Everything okay?
It's that mic. Turn that mic this way while you're not talking. It's that one, right? Get that off axis.
That better? All right, maybe
It was you.
drop back to 200 hertz or something.
Yeah,
let's
that's our
start
favorite.
talking like engineers.
I'm
Come on.
sorry.
Bring down to 200.
Bring down the bass.
Was my mic?
So this is the Audio Legends panel. I just want to make things clear. I'm the audio. They're the legends right here. These three guys. It's an honor to be with them. But again, the reason we're here is for Phi Def. And when I first heard it, I didn't quite understand what they were saying, so I'll say it slowly. Phi, from hi-fi, def. I guess definition?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi-fi definition. I guess Phi Def is the name of what we're talking about. And as it's been explained already, it's a process that somehow magically transforms what was already an amazing record or great sounding mix into something that sounds even that much more emotional. It brings the intimacy of the performance that much closer to your perception. It doesn't change it. It doesn't make it. There's no compression added. There's no equalization added. It's kind of a bit of magic, but what it does is essentially just bring out the best of the mix and the emotion of the mix without altering the mix, and it uses psychoacoustics to do that, and it does it extremely effectively, so much so that we've all kind of endorsed it. And if you have a chance to listen to Phi Def, you'll probably have a chance to listen to it. We can't play it here because it's too noisy, but if you listen to the original recording and then you listen to the Phi Def recording, don't listen to it as an analytical listening session, like listening to whether the bass is the same or the drums are the same. Listen to it as an overall holistic emotional experience. And if you do that, you're going to be blown away. So, and as that's our job, is to bring that emotional experience to everyone, we really support this.
And mainly it was dealing with artists. It wasn't so much my saying, "Oh, I like that." It was convincing the artist that we were working with that this was going to be something better. Convincing an artist that something was better than what they already had and liked. I know that if I played Phi Def for Joe Cocker, he would have looked at me cross-eyed and said, what are we doing here? I can't imagine you wouldn't have had the same with some of those guys you dealt with. Who would look at you and just say, what is this stuff?
Yeah.
It already sounds good. I don't need that shit.
You know, guys, a question I've always wondered, and I shared this with you guys yesterday. For me, part of the joy of getting a new record, part of it was what came off the vinyl. I'm dating myself, I know. But the other part was, aside from the liner notes, was I enjoyed seeing that this was, we used this process or what have you. something I always wondered, and this may have varied from artist to artist, how much say did you ever have like an artist who wanted a certain effect or something done with regard to the recording process or to their voice or the way a certain instrument was recorded? That's something I've always wondered about.
Well, I think we all worked with the kind of artists that would have been involved in every piece of the process, with few exceptions. Joe might have said, if it sounds good to you, it sounds good, but I can't imagine James or Donald or Jagger or Diana not saying, well, I don't care, whatever you like. Not in the world I lived in.
You know what? I was just with Jeff Emmerich, who was the engineer for the Beatles.
All right.
And he tells the story, you know, the Beatles wanted to make a record that nobody's ever had before, but the only tools he had was a 4-track tape machine, a microphone, a Leslie cabinet, and an echo chamber. And I think there was a song that Lennon came to him that specifically wanted something. He wanted to sound like he was yelling from a mountaintop 40 miles away. And
Tomorrow never knows.
I heard that story where he actually asked George to hang him on a string and fly
you put
around
him on
the
a rope.
microphone.
That didn't work so well. But Emmerich, figured out how to get audio, a vocal into a Leslie cabinet, and then he was like, oh, that's exactly what I was looking for. A lot of times, we're just inventing stuff as we go along, and I think one of the reasons we get hired and continue to work is that we're intuitive enough to make that happen, almost read an artist's mind. So most of the time, I get telepathic messages from the artist of what they're looking for. Don't lock me up, but it's kind of true.
I had somebody that would disc jockeys
nobody ever
too.
says, I want it, I'm looking for.
Okay.
But here's the song, and you do something, and you react to the instrumentation, the message of the song, and you do something, and you try to create something that's compelling. And I have to say, 99% of the time, it works out, and and I'm a fucking genius.
No,
He is a genius.
Can you say that on the internet?
you can say whatever the hell you want. Al, something I've wondered, like with people like Count Basie or Frank Sinatra, did they have a say, or I've read a lot where Mr. Sinatra would walk in and just pick up the music and just adapt to what was happening, and then,
One of the things you learn about Frank is you better be ready, because when he comes in, he's ready and ready to sing. And when we were doing the duets album, the producer, Phil Ramone, had built in Capitol a beautiful booth with the air conditioning coming in, and we had a bottle of Jack Daniels in there, and we had a carton of Camel cigarettes and Tootsie Rolls. Frank loved Tootsie Rolls. So I'm standing out there with Frank. Frank comes in, and we're standing next to one another, and we have the big band right in front of us, and then all the strings in the other studio. And we're standing, and Frank looked at me and said, "Where do you want me?" And I said, "Oh, in there." And he looked at the booth and he said, "I'm not going in there."
wow.
I said, "Well, where do you want to be?" He said, "How about right here in front of the band?" I said, "Okay." Right. I turned around, I looked at Phil, I said, "This is your fucking problem, buddy." And that's where he stood. And we did, every take that we did was the first take. One take on all the way down, except for a couple where he wasn't happy with the way the tempo was, and he'd stop and say, "Let's slow it down a little," or "It needs to be a little faster." But everything was top to bottom. That's why I say you better be ready, because you can't say, "Gee, Frank, the mic went bad," or "this happened," or whatever. I had 3 young technicians sitting around the room. I was using a lot of Neumann microphones and with power supplies and all this stuff. And so we had 3 kids sitting around. Each guy had a Neumann microphone plugged in, just in case our mic went bad, so they could change it right away. And we were in the control room. One of the kids came in and everybody called Sinatra Mr. S. And the kid came and said, Mr. S just spoke to me. I said, really? What did he say? He said, you kid, get the fuck out of my way. It's a true story.
Great story. Gary, I know you've got a few that you've shared with me. You know, Lore always had it that Donald and Walter were, you know, very particular and perfectionists in the studio. You know,
We were, you know, sort of, we'd walk in a room and somebody would say to us, are we going to do 45 takes today? Are we going to do 95 takes? We would just record until we liked it. And Al's talking about doing one takes. And we weren't really noted for one takes.
Come over here and sit in this microphone. Come on.
Yeah,
Is it warm?
Come on. Yeah, I got it warm for you.
actually, Gary, while you're changing seats, and since we're doing something from a radio show, you once shared with me the story about how the song FM was recorded. Something about you got a phone call in the middle of the night.
Well, Jeff Picaro, who was
Speaking to the mic.
one of the more well-known studio drummers in LA for years. He was the drummer in Toto
Yep.
and all. Donald called me one night about 3 a.m. and said, let's record. We were doing this song for the movie FM, and our manager at the time, Irving Azoff, the famous Irving Azoff, said, I need this track tomorrow. So I called Jeffrey. I said, Donald wants to record. He said, it's 4 a.m. I said, Donald wants to record. He said, my drums are all up on Studio 55, Richard Perry's studio. I don't have any drums. Well, Richard Perry and I were partners when we very first entered the business. I called Richard at 4:30. I said, I need one of you guys to come and open the door. I need to cut a track with Donald for a movie. So we did. We went up there at 5 a.m. Jeffrey did the track. We left. We finished the track, but it was a movie. So Donald said, you know, we don't use strings, but it's for a movie. I think we should use strings. Well, we didn't know anybody. So someone said, you call Al Schmidt. So we called Al Schmidt. He said, you called Johnny Mandel. We had this really famous string writer. We went into Capitol Studios, 40 people playing strings. There was Al. Finished that. Now we have to mix. You won't mind this. So we're going to mix at Armin Steiner Studio, just up the block from Capitol. Donald and I usually would get there early. So we walk in the room, it's empty. No sound, no Al, no nothing. Let's go eat. We go eat, an hour goes by, we go back, we walk back in the room. There's no sound and no Al. So we said, you know, we'll just go wait here for him. And we walked up this little ramp, and there was Al, in between the speakers, with his head, no sound, watching the needles, doing a mix, and Donald said, what are you doing? He said, I'm just getting levels. He said, let me hear that shit. He put it up, and it was like almost mixed.
Wow.
Was that the first no Al, or was that?
No, it was the first. It was the first no Al. Absolutely. So, you know, you hear about people, and then you meet them. Like we met Al, we didn't know Al, and all of those stories turned out to be true. He could do that.
Amazing, amazing. Ed, I'm sure you've got some interesting experiences, you know, with some of the likes that you've worked with.
I don't know what I can talk about.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what is this ringing?
No, I don't hear it.
Yeah.
So anywho,
Hey, yeah.
can you give me a little more verb on my voice? You know what? I like to equate my career, if I did a book, is like, how many artists could I have pissed off at me at one time? You know, pulled a gun on, pulled a knife on. I think I could say it the first time I met Keith Richards, he pulled a knife on me. He thought I didn't record something, but I did. And then we were friends after that. But,
Wow.
But like Al says, you better be ready. And you never want to be the guy in the studio that said, well, nobody said record. You better have that red button on all the time. And all you kids at home that are listening, walk in the room and push the red button, because there's no getting it back. You don't want to be the schmuck that didn't record the greatest take ever.
Well,
Frank, what about you?
Well, and just echoing what Ed just said is that back in, in the 80s and stuff, when we were working with tape, you had to be on your toes because you wanted to record everything. You wanted to be there right, going on, but the tape was only 15 minutes long, and so, if it wasn't right, then you'd have to wind back and go and start again and so forth. So you had to be on your toes. But nowadays, there's absolutely no reason that the red button isn't on all the time. You never let the band rehearse, my God, without pressing record, because so often that ends up being your take. And there are a lot of
buttons.
Yeah.
yeah,
He did say red buttons.
yeah, red buttons. Yeah,
That's where that came from.
yeah. So and there were a lot of musicians that many times they would do their best take that first run through. Michael Brecker was a classic case of that. He would, if you got Michael on the first take, it was unbelievable. But Michael, being Michael, would want to
Or
learn
if
more
Randy
and
wasn't
more,
next to him.
and he'd want to final, and make it better and better. But that's when your job as a producer or something is to say, something. There's an emotional thing here going on that this is the one.
Before I really had a job, I had some really close friends. My best friends were a group called Jay and the Americans.
Oh, great.
They had all these hits. I didn't love them. They were just my friends.
Wow.
So they would take wherever they went, I went. They were in the studio all the time. There was a track, Lieber and Stoller, who were to this day, my favorite writers and producers of music. They had a track for the Drifters called Only in America. They put it out, and stations south of Washington wouldn't play the record. They loved the record. They took the Drifters off, and they put my friends on the record, which they had a #1 record with in Only in America. But when they were recording, and I was sitting there watching Mike and Jerry, somebody played, and they didn't record it. And Jerry said, "This is a fucking recording studio. You record this stuff." And I just never forgot. The button was always on from that day on. Never forgot it. Because of things like not only Michael, who was, unbelievable musician, but I had you guys were talking about a one take. As I was saying, we didn't do one takes. And we also never hired Steve Gadd. And so we had this song called Asia. We couldn't think of any one of our drummers who could play that song. And so one of us said, this might be the time to call Steve. So we went to Producer's Workshop in LA with Bill Schnee, who we never met Gadd, because there were two cliques in New York. You were in the Stuff Band, or you were with my guy, Rainey and Purdy and those guys, and never the twain met very often. So Gadd comes in, introduce ourselves. This is Donald, Walter, blah, blah, blah. We have this song. It was 16 pages. You put it around the semicircle of the drums. So Steve is standing there. He says to Rainey, "Would you just run it down? I just want to make sure the chart's right." So Rainey and Victor Feldman, they play it once. He marks the chart. Steve says, "All right, let's do this." And so the track you hear is the only time he played it.
Wow.
He never played a beat other than the track you hear.
That's one of the most classic songs of not only pop music, but rock music in so many different ways. I see people out in the audience, their jaws hitting the floor, Gary.
It's better than that.
I know that. So continue.
So 6 months go by. We did that in LA, and we were living in LA. But Elliot Shiner, would be on this panel if he wasn't mixing 38 albums of Fish right now, we went to New York to mix at a renowned studio we all love called A&R.
Oh, of course.
That doesn't exist anymore.
yeah.
Phil's studio. We're mixing. We're about 95% done with the mix. Somebody walks in and says, Gadd, he's down the hall, he's playing with Michael Franks. I said to Donald, Asia, right? So I walk in, I tell, hey, Steve, Donald, Walter, and I, we're down the other room. When you're done, come by. And we finish mixing, and he walks in, and he said, what are you guys doing? We said, we're just mixing. Play it for Steve. So he sits in front of the console, and we play him 99% finished Asia. It was fabulous sound. I mean, it was just fabulous sounding. And it was sitting there, and Gad turns around, and he said, wow. Who's playing drums? You know, the four of us, we just looked at each other. Well, he wasn't. If you knew Gad, you would know he wasn't kidding.
Exactly.
And we just looked at each other, and I said, you are stupid. And he turned for a minute and looked at all of us, and he said, I'm a motherfucker.
He was right.
He was right.
He was right.
You know, Gary, you said something while you were talking about Lieber, Stoller, and they were influences. And a thought that came to me, and I'd be interested to know, who are some of the major influences for you, as each of you, as either musicians, artists, fellow, producers, mixers, engineers?
James Brown.
Yeah?
James Brown.
As a performer, meaning in everything.
Everything. As a producer, arranger, performer, dancer, motherfucker. James Brown, man. James Brown.
It's funny you say that because, he used to own radio stations. And when I worked at Z100 in New York, he was a guest on our morning show, the Z Morning Zoo. And I got to meet him, and he came up to me and he goes, hey, man, the air filter. Do you keep the air filter clean? I said, what do you mean? He goes, the air filter and the transmitter. And I guess one time his transmitter dumped because no one cleaned the air filter. You better clean the air filter. So he signed an autograph to me. It says, dear Frank, make sure the air filter's clean, motherfucker. James Brown.
See, I told you.
That's funny.
Mr. Brown.
Yep, Mr. Brown.
Mr. Brown.
I had an engineer that was probably, I was a teenager, a guy by the name of Tommy Dowd,
Yeah.
who was one of the great engineers that ever lived. And he taught me so much. He and my uncle, who had a studio that I used to go to when I was a little kid, and they taught me how to react in the studio, the demeanor, how to react with musicians, how to talk to people, besides how to do your job, but how what your personality brings to the studio. How, when musicians get to know you, they see you, they're relaxed, they know, oh, Al's cool, man. I go in and I don't care if it's a big band or whatever. I go in, I say hello to every guy in the band before we start. We talk, how the kids, this guy, what are you doing? And everybody is just, it's kind of, I don't know, those are two guys that really influenced me. Les Paul was my uncle's best friend, and they worked on a lot of things together. So he was Uncle Les to me, and from the time I was 7, 8 years old, I've been in the recording studio. So watching these guys and how they reacted and how they talk to one another and so forth was just eye-dropping for me, and it
Wow.
just, it set my whole career. I mean, when I was 8 years old, I knew what I wanted to do in life, and I wanted to be a recording engineer like my Uncle Harry, and make a lot of money. Well, I became a recording engineer. I'm not sure about the make a lot of money.
Well, I'm not just saying this because you guys are sitting here, and the way you're talking about being able to be around Les Paul, that's how I feel today, having all of you here. And for how many of you in the audience here, when he was talking about the feel of connecting with the musicians, for a lot of us that have been in radio, how many of you felt that way with regard to radio stations and the air staff and people of that nature? And how cool is it that from where these guys come from, of creating the content, and then we were able to transmit the content and be able to provide a wonderful experience for the listeners, So,
Well, for me, it was Lieber and Stoller, one, because they made my favorite records, and I had access to them through my friends, and I'd be in the studio. But I was there the night they cut Cool Cool Kitty from New York City in America, in the America Hotel, right? With Brooks Arthur. With Brooks Arthur. And Jerry was there and Mike was there. And Mike was a musician. He was a wonderful arranger and keyboard player. And Jerry knew how to flush the toilet. I mean, he knew nothing about music. Which for me, I really appreciated what he was able to do, because I really don't know anything about, I don't play. I read a little, but I don't play. But I could see somebody who could express himself musically without having to say a G flat. And so he would sit there to Mike and they would be working and he'd say, you know, I don't like that thing. Tell them to do it, I don't know, a little more purple. And I said, you know, I can do that. And that's why I pursued it, because I could.
By the
do
way,
what he
Gary,
did.
you did it damn well.
And Jerry Lieber is in the Hall of Fame for a reason.
Well, the first name, I think the first engineer that I remember knowing about, and was Jeff Emmerich. That's the one. That's the name that inspired me initially, because I would listen to music, but I realized at some point early on that I wasn't just listening to the record the way other people were. I was listening to the sound of it. In a way, I would talk to people about the sound of these things, and they didn't really get what I was saying. And so it started out with Jeff Emmerich, just realizing that some people made a difference in the way the music sounded, in the way it was recorded. Whether you liked the classical piece, you'd listen to two different versions with two different orchestras, and in addition to the difference in playing, there was a difference in the way it was recorded.
Right. Oh, yeah.
It was then in the 70s that I started to focus in on names like, there was Al Schmidt, there was Elliot Shiner, because I was a big Steely Dan fan, and I remember, and Roger Nichols.
Oh, yeah,
and
for
I
sure.
remember seeing those names on the records and realizing that these were the guys that really, that made it something special, because it wasn't just music to me, the way they recorded. It was poetry in a certain sense, and it struck me in an emotional way that a lot of the other stuff, even great stuff, didn't. So I guess they were the guys. And then in the second half of my career, I got to spend the latter half of the 90s and 2000s with Phil Ramone. And just sitting there working with him on a day-to-day basis, you know, was an experience that very few people get to have, and I happen to think that because of his influence, I'm better now than I ever was, and I think that that's one of the best things you can do, is to work with someone like a Phil or like an Al or what have you, because then you not only see it, you experience it. The subtle ways they deal with artists, the ways they suddenly take a session that's going downhill and move it into. So that's beyond the sound, but it's all part. They're all part of the same thing. But so those were the ones that really hit me.
You know, I found it interesting how you talk about Jeff Emmerich, because having had the chance now to visit at Abbey Road, and I too, there's something about the way they captured especially the Beatles. And you see the way that, you know, and we've all read about how the Beatles were basically in the early days cast off to Abbey Road, and it was not a named studio, but the way they captured their music, it's so, the detail and the clarity was incredible, you know, and I hearken back to some of the stuff with Mr. S. You know, I've recently doing some work that is stereo surround sound based, where I was able to isolate some things, and some of the detail that I'm hearing, and I was talking to somebody earlier today about some of the Capitol stuff. I mean, it's astonishing that time period and the type of technology that we had. It's, you know, it's affected my emotional experience many times over.
Phil used to play a record, and it was a Nat King Cole. Do you remember Phil had this on a CD? It was a Nat King Cole record, and it was just one song, but The Very Thought of You. And you'd listen to this, and the orchestra would come in with a short intro, and then Nat would start singing The Very Thought of You, and just the arrangement and everything, but the sound on his voice was like, I sat there and I was just like, oh my God, and this is recorded like in 1955 or something like that, and it was just like, it kind of, every goosebump in my body, started going.
I have one like that was recorded in the 50s, and it's the stereo mix of True Love Ways by Buddy Holly. It starts out where the producer says, there's a little bit of chat, and then Buddy breaks into this, and it's like it sounds like he was there yesterday, and when you think about the time period and what was available to them technologically, it's haunting in a strange way. So I thought if you guys don't mind, we have a nice audience here. If anyone has some questions, we've got an esteemed group here. Yeah, and I see somebody out in the audience, a former coworker, Clark Novak, who's, by the way, I think it's your birthday. Clark, why don't you come on up? By the way, Gary, Clark is probably one of the top Steely Dan fans. Clark Novak, Gary Katz. So Clark, or if somebody has a question for our esteemed panel, or if you've got clicked in and you're joining us, YouTube Live or Facebook Live, you want to ask someone on our panel a question, we'd be happy to entertain it. Don't everybody speak all at once.
Well, I think you called us a steamed panel, and they're esteemed, yeah. So,
Esteemed panel.
Yeah, esteemed panel, so they were probably a little afraid.
That's an excellent question.
That is an excellent question.
What is the answer to that, Dustin?
Actually, we have somebody here, Dustin. Connect up with him. He'll be able to provide you a demo, and then we've got other information about the technology, and we'll get that demonstration for you.
And if you come to Los Angeles, come to the Village. I'll play it for you for a small, one-time only fee
of $1 million. $1 million. Bring it on.
Yeah, it wasn't an accident, those records.
The question for those of you out in the internet world, Clark asked, were Walter and Donald really the perfectionists that all of us were led to believe? So
That's what we did. We made records.
yeah, of course you can, Al. This is really your show.
When we were mixing Peg, we had Gary, Walter, everybody was there. There was 5 or 6 of us. It was before automation.
Lots of hands.
And we all had our job to do to get the mix. And it was like in the guitar solo, it was an echo thing to be brought up. So every mix was a performance.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So I'd get it done. Oh man, I had my I said, man, that was great. And then Walter would say, gee, I could have used a little more echo here. Okay, boom, back to the... We went on for 12 hours to do that mix.
Wow. We had lots of hands. Everybody had hands on.
Everybody had something to do. But the great thing was it was a team working together. And it's so funny when you get your thing done, you think, oh, man, that's great. Somebody says, I did it. I say, oh, shit, I got to do it again. And, and that was what it was about. But listen to Peg,
It was Donald and Walter, but Donald was the mother.
Yeah.
So in a way,
said,
Al,
okay,
isn't that
okay.
like something? I saw this interview with George Martin before he passed, where he was talking about using the studio as also an instrument, aside from the musical instruments, but the studio itself became an instrument.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. The environment.
Yeah, there's this story about how they did Tomorrow Never Knows with all these tape loops and, just John and George bringing things up and down, and that's what we ended up hearing.
And I was just with Emmerich, and that was the first time anyone ever used a tape loop that anyone
So I understand.
has documented, that anyone knew, and it was it was kind of like a sample in a loop, and it was going around the room, and
that
everyone
was
looked at him like, how are we going to do this? This is crazy, but they pulled it off, and you just think on your feet. But I'd like to say something that Al said. The best part of what we do is when you have a group of people in a room together making music. It's the purest thing that happens, and when the individual parts as a whole are greater, the whole is greater than the individual parts, and time disappears, and everyone just working together. It's the best of what people do. It's the best of our existence, and I just relish the opportunity and feel so lucky to have the opportunity to be in a room with people that are just so dedicated and so giving to each other. It's the best part of life, and I feel so lucky to be able to do it.
On that Tomorrow Never Knows, that was also his first night. That was Jeff's first session with the Beatles, and they came out with Tomorrow Never Knows. It's like, and you've got to figure that, I would be coming in for the next couple of years. How am I going to top that? Well, he did, but that's the thing is using the studio. I think that's what influenced me most about those records was they were actually using the studio now as an instrument. It was now not just about necessarily recording the best violin sound or the best piano sound, but somehow making that the studio as also part of the production of the record, and which is why I think so many of those records, I Am a Walrus, you listen to that even today, and you say, where the hell did that come from?
I know.
It's like, it's, there's so many elements that...
But you know what, Frank? I think a lot of times we get wound up in the kind of equipment that we're using, and it's, except for Phi Def, it's not the equipment. It's your imagination and the way you use it. And, and you could have somebody that has every modern tool and every computer at their disposal, but you can get a guy like Al Schmidt with a hammer and a nail that could make better sounding music than somebody with every tool. And like Bruce Swedien used to tell me, he says, boy, nobody leaves the studio dancing to the gear, and that couldn't be more true. They leave,
And what about Frank Sinatra? The microphone you used on his vocal on the Duets album.
Oh, yeah. Well, he wanted a handheld mic.
Yeah.
So we used a wireless mic on him.
Really?
Yeah, Vega. It was unbelievable.
I recently read an interesting article where they were talking about as the recording process, and this goes way back, was growing technologically. They said that the first two singers that learned how to use a microphone to their voice was Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra.
Let me tell you something about that.
Please do.
This is a lost art
Yeah.
called microphone technique. And Rosemary Clooney, you could set the fader on her and forget it. She leaned in, she backed off, she lifted her head with the P-pops. Sinatra was that way. I've recorded Bing Crosby. He was that way. Bing Crosby, when I worked with him, he'd sing, and then there was an instrumental break, and he had the racing form. I swear to God. Sing, have the racing form, go down, and then time to sing again. It was amazing. But getting back to the room thing, using the room as an instrument, you learn, that's why I love working in certain rooms, but you learn where the room breathes. Mm-hmm. Where the room's got the warmth, and you learn what instruments work best in those sections of the room. So you're marrying the instrument, the sound of the instrument, to what the room will capture. It's really fascinating, and we don't talk about that as much as how important the room is.
And well, especially in your case, because you do a lot of Omni recording, so that makes the room
Yeah.
even more important to what
Everything
you're
I
doing.
do, and my microphones are in Omni. They're open all around.
For some in the audience or on the internet, they may not know what Omni means.
Omni? Oh, it's my mantra. I use that whenever I have to meditate. No, Omni is a Omni is there are three types of microphones: a cardioid,
right.
There's the figure eight,
Binaural.
and the Omni.
Yeah. Right.
Three polar patterns. Omni just means
gets-
it's open all
Right.
around. It's a point
Here's
source, and everywhere it's spherical around it is the sound. Cardioid means what it's facing, it picks up.
Picks up,
What's
right.
behind it, it rejects. And figure eight just means what's on the sides, it picks up, but it doesn't pick up anything front or rear.
Thank you, sir.
So I believe that microphones, when they're made, are made to sound best in the Omni position. Once you start making an Omni mic cardioid, you're
You're me-
changing
yeah.
things.
You're
So that's why I use microphones in Omni all the time. I love to capture the ambience in the room, get the leakage. I think it gives more depth, more.
Sure.
Anyway.
Now,
For all you kids at home listening to that, try your Omni microphone, your Omni polar pattern. It's really
Now,
true.
the following may be a little controversial because all of you have come from the recording world back in what I would call like the heyday, the great sounding studios. We mentioned A&R, the Village. Today,
Record plant,
the
Capitol,
record plant, right?
East
Capitol,
West.
Yeah, there's
right?
so many.
Today, it can be
Oceanwide.
somebody's bedroom.
And it usually is.
So your views as to the way things, I don't want to say the way things were, because you couldn't really, back, years ago, if you were doing it at home, it basically was a demo with, egg crates on the wall for soundproofing. But your views as to the way the world is today with regard to recording.
Oh, I think the stuff we do in the studio sounds so much better. When you have a guy putting guitar part onto a track and he's in his bedroom, he may be comfortable in doing this and sounding great, but he's not interacting with the other musicians live at the same time. And I think that's such a big part of how records were made. And today when you got, a bass player, send me the files, and he puts the bass part on in Colorado, and then they send it back to get a guitar player. It's not everybody working together. I mean, he's working off what he's hearing, but what he's hearing is never changing. So when he's in the room working with somebody, things are constantly changing. So, somebody has a different little thing that he does, changes what you're going to do. So
And it's
I'm really for everybody working at the same time. I
it's
mean,
important for the player to hear.
yes.
Can I
They
speak
won't
on
do
that?
that themselves in their pajamas. Not often. They won't go, nah, it's good for someone to hear. You can do that a little better. You can pick that up in that downbeat a little better.
Can I speak on that?
Please do.
So, I got to live through the heyday, not like Al, but, I started in the 70s, and when the only place to make music was in a recording studio. That was kind of the entry point. You had to have a certain amount of skill to be able to get into a studio to make music. And I loved it. But I don't want to be the guy talking about back in the day. I don't want to be that guy. And I think, we lived through that, but there's some people now, listen, things always change, but there's some people now that are doing things with computers and loops and programs that are just genius and coming up with things that you've never heard before and sounds you've never heard before and making music that's just as compelling as anything ever was. Listen, I'm really lucky. I still get to go to the studio with the greatest musicians in the world and make great records. But you know what? I also get to mix things from somebody that did it in their garage or their or the back seat of their car. And if and the truth is, if you have a laptop computer, you have the most advanced studio that was ever made in the world. And like I said, it's your imagination and the way you use it. There's certainly something to be said for being in the studio with cats that have not only were born with a gift, but have worked really hard and practiced every day to develop it and be able to transmit emotion through their fingers and through sticks and through vibrating air molecules. But there's something to be said with what people are doing now, and I think there's room for both. And you have to look ahead. There's a generation of people that are doing things we never heard before. And you know what? And I'm anxious and eager to see what happens. What some kid in a garage, with the laptop is going to come up with. And I can't wait to see that, and I have no doubt he's going to come up with something as compelling as the Beatles were when we saw him on the Ed Sullivan Show, 50 years ago.
I get it.
Yeah.
I get it.
But I do have one comment about the music of today, and I don't think it necessarily has to do with how it's made. I don't think how a record's made. There is a place for doing it one piece at a time. I've made some records that I like that way. There's also my favorite of doing it with all the musicians together. But I think the critical thing for me today is that we overuse the technology to a point where we have sterilized the records, the recordings. I call it groove versus grid. We've entered an era where everything is tuned to such a point that all the emotion that the singer put into the recording is now gone. Because when a singer like a Sinatra or an Ella Fitzgerald or slides into a note, they do that consciously. That's part of their performance. The idea, or when they lay back on a phrase, the idea of that is to create a certain amount of tension in the listener and then release it. It's like sex in a way. You have the tension and the release. It doesn't get better than that. That's what we're all about. Well, in this case, this happens over and over in a song. And suddenly now, we just see a lot of blobs on a screen, and we just line them all up, and without realizing, we've just sterilized the music. And we do the same thing with the timing, with the grid. Everything's got to look like it's on the grid. And in fact, everything's got to look. Right there, that's the wrong word. It shouldn't. We look at music today, we should be listening to it. Because we're able to see the waveforms now in front of us, we start looking at sound rather than listening to it. And my studio, I have a monitor on the right, and I have a TV monitor on the right and a TV monitor on the left. I have nothing in front of me because I never want to get caught seeing the audio, because then it's like anything else. Expectation and perception are going to change what you hear. And so for me, I don't want that influencing anything. If I don't hear it, if I hear it and it sounds good and the groove is there, I don't care if there's a flam. I don't care if the drummer's hanging back on the beat.
It's interesting you say that about music. I've actually had the same thing occur in developing algorithms. I've done some development for our processors where I'd spend days upon days of trying to get a waveform to look a certain way based on something. And I'll finally, like 4 o'clock in the morning, go, wow, I've got it. I'll go in the office like an hour later, 5 in the morning, get it running, and I'll go, oh my God, that sounds like crap. and because it was too pure, and then I'll put a little bit of something, maybe a little bit of salt, as my buddy in New York would say, Vasanagol juice into the audio, and they'll go, oh my God, it sounds great. But then I go and I look at the waveform, and it don't look so good anymore.
Look at the waveform of a tube mic versus some of the transistor mics, and you'll say, well, why do people still prefer that 47 or that 67? Because it's not just about the specs.
That's right. In our own way, scientifically, it's the emotion that we bring into it. Yeah. That's why when people ask me about signal processing, I call it, there's black magic involved. And I know that, for some of you guys, you're twisting the knobs. You're not saying, oh, I'm only going to wait until the meter goes to 10. You get it because the ears are our best, is the best instruments that we have.
Yeah.
So
I use my tail more than my ears. If my tail wags, it's good.
I get it. How about if we see if we take a question from the audience? Oh, now we got questions. You, sir.
What was your favorite effect that you did that was memorable for you that you did with some creative engineering?
The question was some favorite effect that they did that you'd think of as creative engineering.
Creative engineering to accomplish it.
Well, because I'm not an engineer, and I can talk about it, just sitting in the room and watching. The first track that we ever did as Steely was Do It Again. And Donald was not a fan of his voice. So we had to find a way that we could mix it and that he would say, okay. So when we mixed it, Roger used something called a Cooper time cue. Whatever the hell that is. And when we were finished with the mix, Donald said, that actually sounds pretty good. And he said to me, let's go get something to eat. Hey, Raj, on this next track, Reelin' in the Years, use the same thing. Right? Went across the street to Dolores, got something to eat, came back a couple hours later, and there's Roger sitting on the floor. This is sitting on the floor, alone. In the village now, there's no door, but there used to be a big wooden door to get from the hallway into the control room. You'd have to pull the door. So we went back, I pulled the door, and there's Roger sitting on the floor with some wires and this Cooper time cube. He had a left wire and a right wire. He put them together. It melted in his hands. Fagan and I looked at each other, and from that day, he was the immortal. There was no explanation. And we never got it again. And Fagan was pissed at him that he broke the Cooper
Actually,
time cube.
I want to hear the rest of your from the rest of you. But you mentioned Reelin' in the Years. Would you mind telling the story about that you told me when we were in London about Elliot and the guitar break on Reelin' in the Years?
We had a guitar player, he's a pretty famous guy named Skunk Baxter, but this was maybe the first track we did was Do It Again. The second track we did was Reelin'. And we were doing a solo in what is now, it doesn't exist anymore, but it was B. There was no D. And Jeffrey played in a way, if you've ever seen Jeffrey play in the Doobie Brothers or in Steely Live, Jeffrey likes to lose himself. So he, loses his place, he gets red in the face, he runs around, he jumps. But we were a static band. We were boring. So we had Jeffrey, who could do something that made it look like a rock and roll band, until one night that Donald saw him in London jump up and down, play out of tune, and he said to him, if I see light come from both of your shoes at the same time, you're fired. But we were doing Reelin', he couldn't play it. We didn't play it like we liked it. Elliot Randall was my friend from New York. He was Jeffrey's friend. He came in to say hi to me and Jeffrey. When he came in, Jeffrey was so pissed at us for the hours. His fingers were bleeding because Donald could easily say things like, anytime you want to get started, we're good. Literally.
Yeah, I know.
And so Elliot walked in and Jeffrey said, hey, if you don't like the way I'm fucking doing it, let Elliot play it. And it didn't take Donald a second to say, okay. And Elliot played it, and it's the only time he played it. The entire piece of Reelin' is one pass.
Wow.
Amazing.
Guys, if any of the rest of you have an answer to this, to his question, please.
Well,
go ahead.
I had a song called Eternal Flame by the Bangles, and I was mixing it, and the idea of the song is it starts out with this little music box and Sue's vocal, and then it's just supposed to continue to build and build and build till you get to the end with the full orchestra and everything. The problem is when I got to the end of the song, there was still something missing. I felt like I needed that snare drum or something from Bridge Over Troubled Waters. I needed, and there was nothing there to get it. So I noticed that there was a click track on the song, So this is long before the days of, where you can kind of do anything and samples and all this. This is like 87, 88, something like that. So I just took the click track and I just put it through every processor I could find to try to turn it into a snare. And I got this, and reverbs and stuff, and I got this huge sound that when the last chorus comes in, close your eyes, and so it was, but it wasn't. It sounds like this huge snare coming from somewhere, but it was a click track.
Wow. Pretty cool.
I'll be really quick. I'll talk about. There's a record I did, a Bonnie Raitt record called "Nick of Time," and when we did that, it was 1989. Before that, we were coming out of an era with big hair and big choruses and big reverbs and big delays, and when I was in the middle of that, and you weren't really ever done with a mix or a recording until you used every patch chord in the studio, and that's how you knew that you were done, because you had so many effects and you worked so hard to get things. So we go in, it's the very first day of tracking with Bonnie Raitt, and the band's in the room, the drums are set up, and on my head and I'm getting sounds on just the very first song, which happened to be the song "Nick of Time," and if you know what that song is. And I started out, and the first thing I did, he played the drum, and I put a big reverb on it, and Don was the producer, kind of leaned over to me and says, "Hey, Ed, why don't you dry that snare up a little bit?" So I did. I kind of dried it up and went, "Oh, that's better." And then I went, fuck it. And I dried it up all the way, and it kept getting better. And as I made it smaller and more personal, the record got better. So for me, it was the lesson of less is more sometimes, and figuring it out that really that's how the emotion of that thing came through, and that one brought her career back, and it gave
Great
me
record.
a career, and Don was a career, and a lot of people a career. So it was kind of the opposite of effects. It was the lack of effects that reminded me where emotion really comes from, and like what Al is talking about in the studio, it really comes from what goes into the microphone in front, and that's where the magic is made.
What that was less snare and more Bonnie.
Yeah, right.
That was the good thing.
Yeah.
That was the first thing.
Exactly. Me?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I don't know. I don't use a lot of effects. I think I did the Unforgettable record with Natalie Cole and her father, and it was when they recorded Nat, the echo was recorded. It wasn't like we do today, where we put monitor echo and all, but there's really the voices without echo, and then when we mix, we add to it. So what I had to do, and I was at another studio mixing it. I was at Schnee's mixing it, and I couldn't get her to sound like she was in the room with her dad.
Right.
Which was the whole purpose of this record. So it took a long time, tried everything, and I worked the whole day. And I thought, to the point that David Foster was producing, and I thought at one point he was going to say, "Gee, maybe we should get someone else to do this." So I went home, I slept, I woke up in the middle of the night, I had some ideas. I came back to the studio, and I did some things to capture the echo, the live chamber at Capitol. And
You nailed it.
it fit.
Yeah, it did.
And it was perfect. It was like, and when I finished it, and I was doing the George Benson record at the same time. When I played it for George Benson, I mean, his jaw dropped. He just couldn't believe it. Nobody was doing that back then in those days, resurrecting the dead.
Right.
So that was it. I'm not a big effects guy, so.
Got it.
But it's the emotion that you
Yeah,
captured of
exactly.
them being together.
Yeah.
Yep.
We had a question over here.
Rudy Van Gelder.
Rudy was a strange guy, Rudy would lock the piano, so the piano player couldn't get to the piano till 5 minutes before the session. because he didn't want them messing with the piano. He also wore white gloves. He always wore white gloves. It wouldn't work. Did he lock the bathroom? It wouldn't work today because if you're doing automation, you can't. It doesn't work with gloves. I know. I tried it. So, but you know, he knew the room in New Jersey that he had. He knew where the musicians. And if you listen to his records, and God bless them, they're all great. They all sound the same, except for the performances of the artist. Check it out sometime and you'll see. And, you know, he just knew how to make those records. And he made some great ones, you know. And the performances were cool, but he didn't want anybody. I couldn't go there to visit. He wouldn't let you in. He didn't want anybody stealing his things. He was a strange, kind of quirky guy that way. But he made some great records nonetheless. And pretty strange though.
We have a question right here.
What piece of advice would you give to the future producers, engineers of the world?
The question is, what future advice would these guys give to the upcoming mixers, engineers, and producers of the world?
Follow your heart. Never give up. Don't let anybody tell you can't do it. You never know when you just keep struggling. You never know when that break will happen. Every one of us get to a point because we've been in the right place at the right time. Just don't let, if this is what you want to do it. You know, just don't let anybody tell you can't do it.
No means nothing.
Exactly.
No means nothing. Yeah.
I mean it. I've seen it so many times where just one little break has changed the whole guy's career, you know, and so people that, you know, you're a little discouraged, nothing's going on, and you're in the right place at the right time. Just, this is what you want to do, follow your heart. And if you're successful, I mean, you know, I know about everybody else. I think we all feel the same way. It's really rare that we work a day in our lives. You know, I get in the car and I'm going in to do Diana Krall. I say, thank you, God. You know, it's just, enjoy going to work, enjoy doing what you're doing. It's like an artist or whatever.
I get nervous.
I get nervous too. You know, I still get nervous.
Well, you don't want to let anybody down. Do you know someone in particular that wants to be a recording engineer or producer? And what's her name?
His name is Tanner. He's at Watermark Center, and they brought in a bunch of students from community college, and you know, just being able to hear you and inspire you, that's no means nothing.
No means nothing. Yeah.
No means nothing. I couldn't get anyone to put up $32 to do a demo for 3 years with Donald and Walter. Not even a demo. It was a joke. And if someone didn't just say, go try it, it would never have happened. It was so out of the box, and, you know, 4-minute guitar solos and a guy who really couldn't sing. And
I tell my
You just say no.
my daughters, and I think this is what I tell, you know, my family is your entire life up until you graduate from high school or college, you're responsible to somebody else. You're responsible to your family, to the school, to your friends, whatever. And then you get out of high school or you get out of college. You're not, hopefully not married yet, you're not attached, you don't have any responsibilities to anyone but yourself for this very brief time in your life. Later on, you're going to find yourself tied down for one reason or another. So if there's a window at all in your life where you could do anything that you want to do, that's the time. And I think to not go for that, to not reach for that ring at that point in time is something you'll always be asking yourself years later, why didn't I try it? Because when you're responsible to no one but yourself, you can live with the fact that you know, your apartment is one room and the bathroom's down the hall shared by 15 other people, you know, because you're doing what your dream, you're doing what you love. But once you have the family or once you do other things, it's going to tie you down. So now is the time to do it. And if it's your dream and you're good at it, I firmly believe that whatever the ups and downs, if you're really good at it, sooner or later, it will happen. It may take a lot out of you, but once you get there, and if you get there, you're looking at guys that every morning wake up and say, I can't believe, you know, I was allowed to do this. You know, that I'm actually doing this. So I say go for it.
Yeah, and if you could get him to get his law degree or medical degree or his business degree in his spare time while he's doing that, it's, you know, yeah. Well, many of us, I'll tell you what though, most of us, everyone that I know that's successful at it, had no plan B, and that really sets the stage that you're on your own and you better show up every day.
Right.
The best advice is show up every day and say yes to almost everything. And a lot of times just showing up. A lot of times just showing up is enough. And the thing we all share too is you get bit by this bug. A lot of people want to do it and kind of want to do it, but it's the people that really want to do it and don't give up. Those are the ones that become successful at it. And it's a hard. The truth is, it's a hard road, and it takes a lot of hard work and a bit of luck, and you got to develop some thick skin, but still keep it thin enough that you can have an open heart. It's you know.
Find good talent.
Yeah, find good talent.
Yeah.
But you know, you can encourage him, but if he wants to do it, he's going to find a way. But show up every day.
You know, we called this session today the Legends of Audio, and a lot of times when you think of legends, you're thinking of things in the past. I know that all of these guys are continuing to do great things. If there's projects that you're capable or able to speak on, you know, be interesting to know what are like the current things on your plates going that are active.
Al is never working again. I think his career might be over.
Yeah, I'm done.
Right, Al?
Nobody wants me.
I find that hard to believe.
I'm getting ready to do an album of standards with Trisha Yearwood.
Whoa.
So I'm looking forward to that. She can sing, and she's a fun chick. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm also teaching, so next Tuesday I leave for Holland. I'm going to teach a little in Holland. And then I go to Paris. I'm teaching a little bit there. And then every year I go to Provence and teach for a week at a school called Mix with the Masters. That's fun. I've done that for 7 years now. So those are things I really look forward to, is being able to change the way people do things, maybe, and make their life a little easier and show them different ways to do things. It's great.
Cool.
Yeah, cool.
I'm in the middle of a record with Willie Nelson that's fabulous. And talk about Mr. S. We're doing Mr. S songs. Don't tell anybody yet. It's a big secret. And I'm going in day after tomorrow. I'm going in the studio to start with Quincy Jones on something I can't tell you what the material is, but I know you're going to hear it, and it's going to be really, really special. And then other than that, I'm never working again.
How about you, Gary?
I'm working with Phi Def because it makes the records I did do sound better. And I'm working with a young girl. I do some teaching in London, and I met a young girl there who I'm working with and just trying to develop.
Can I mention one thing?
Of course. This is your show, guys.
I mean, we're here, and I might as well pitch something beside Phi Def and myself. But I'm also co-producing with a guy named Matt Rawlings, who's a great keyboard player, played with Lyle Lovett, Nashville artist, a new artist by the name of Charlie Green, and I'm really excited about the music that we're making with him.
Cool.
Too.
Good luck.
Thank you. And we'll be using that Phi Def on it, I want you to know, so tune in.
I just finished an album with a woman in Mexico. Her name is Ellie Guerra. And I can't really talk too much about it, but I can say the record's going to come out in June. but it's probably the most exciting thing I've worked on in quite some time. She's a massive talent, and it was really nice to work on something this unique and different at this point in time. The other side of the coin, like Al, I love teaching, and that's really, at this point, I had a couple of persons or teachers in my life that made a difference, and certainly provided me the pathway to where I could do what I really love to do and become successful at it, at a time where I could have taken a different path and not been so happy at the results. And so I like the concept of being able to maybe do that to somebody else, to a student who could use a little guidance or something like that. So that's really my passion, that and research. Some of the things we've talked about. Researching different ways to record sound, researching what it is about distortion. Why do we like distortion? What is it about distortion that makes us feel more comfortable when in reality you would think you would?
Right.
So there's a lot of areas that I'm still interested in, because regardless of what I do, sound is really the essence of my life, I guess. It's,
Earlier today, Frank and I were having a chit-chat. He works out of the New York City area, and he was asking me some of the things that I had done, and I told him that I worked in radio in New York, and come to find that you were telling me a story about how some people were asking you to have records sound like a certain radio station.
Yeah. No, back around in the middle 80s, in the Z100 days, I remember Carly Simon definitively saying, God, I want it to sound like that Z100 stuff, so, and I'm saying, well, geez, all that is a bunch of compression and that, but no, they really wanted it to sound like it sounded on the radio.
Well, how many times did you go in the car with a Noratone?
Yeah.
And make sure it sounded as loud and as good as the record.
Yep, exactly.
Radio.
Absolutely.
We couldn't do that. Our records were low.
Universe from the top of the Empire State Building. WHTZ Z100 New York.
Hey, Scott, Shannon, if you're out there, remember I love you, buddy.
Yeah.
So, gentlemen, I have a feeling that in a few minutes there's a stage not too far from where we're at, and if I just want the NAB to know, because we closed this show down 8 minutes and 32 seconds before 2 o'clock with a little song known as Won't Get Fooled Again, and because we sell loud, it's usually at the top volume, and they're going to be doing something here that's going to get pretty crazy. So we're probably going to need first of all, I can't thank all of you enough for making time out of your busy schedules to make your way to Vegas here to be with us today, share your stories, and recommendations and thoughts and opinions on all this. This has just been tremendous, and something that Gary and I've talked about, which is to carry this forward. By the way, maybe we could call this the Rat Pack, as in the Legend of Audio. We'll call it the Rat Pack, keep your eyes posted by way of Phi Def or the Telos Alliance. That we're Gary and I are trying to take this to where we do another roundtable, and hopefully you guys would want to join us. But this would come live from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, Ohio. We have some ongoing discussions, and we were going to try to do a rehearsal at the Rock Hall, except they've got a little event coming up, I think, in a few days called the induction ceremony. Mm-hmm. In the upcoming, keep your eyes posted, as we may, our hope is to do it yet again, and it may have, this is the, let's say the inaugural group, and, chances are I think we're going to have some other friends as well, and there'll be more stories, and I hope for all of you that have been here in attendance and that clicked in to join us on the internet, that you've enjoyed this. Gentlemen, if there's anything more any of you would like to say, this isn't about me. This is really about all of you. And again, thank you for being able to be here with us.
Thank you for inviting us. It's been a ball.
Want to wrap this up? You're the good rapper here.
I'm a rapper.
The rapper, the Jaggers. Rapper,
Jaggers,
you know,
exactly.
Donnie Iris out of Pittsburgh.
Yeah, right.
So,
No, it's we're all happy to be here. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Same.
And we believe in this, and hopefully we can just keep. I mean, what we're all after at the end of the day is to make music better and better, and make it a more emotional experience. We all had the pleasure of listening to albums in the dark back in the 70s with a group of our friends. That's not done so much anymore, but we'd still love to give you that experience of what music can do for you when it's not accompanied by a video or by jogging or by you doing your homework. There's a real thing happening with music by itself. So, and this is part of our way to hopefully get that out to everyone.
for everybody here in
Phi Def.
attendance, how about a resounding round of applause for our guest today?
Phi Def forever.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So we'll wrap it up. We want to thank everybody once again. This has been the Legends of Audio, coming to you live from Las Vegas at the National Association of Broadcasters Convention here in 2018 in Nevada. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.
Yeah, Frank, you
Thank
were
you.
wonderful.
And you guys over there, thank you, didn't give up.